Hello, hello. Welcome everyone. Welcome to our another edition of DesignX Officers. So for those of you that might be joining in for the first time, Officers is an event where we get to sit down and chat with design leaders across different companies, industries, and teams to learn more about their journeys, their teams, how design is placed in the organization, so that you can get a little bit of a sneak peek behind the job opportunities that you see out there on our DesignX job board or on LinkedIn, and also just in general, get to learn about how design happens at different teams and different organizations. So really excited for today's session. But before we dive in, where are folks joining in from? So usually I know we get a lot of a good variety of geographic diversity amongst the folks joining in for these events. So um, let's see what are folks joining in from today. So of course, we have our good own representation from Toronto. So Lakun and Soyin joining in from Toronto. We have Gabri joining in from Ottawa. Nihon joining in from London. Also, I forgot to mention, so this is a live stream AMA. So please do contribute and put in your questions in the chat. Anything that you're curious about our speaker, about our guest, about the team, about the company, and I can bring in those questions during our conversation. So I of course, came in with my own questions that I'm curious to learn more about. But we will try to make it as conversational, as inclusive, and AMA focused as possible. We also have Hannah joining in from Vancouver, the Blue Dog joining in from Virginia, and Courtney joining in from Texas. That's amazing. So again, quite a few time zones we are spanning here, which is always really, really amazing to see. And so we are chatting with Josh today. So for those of you who were at Remote Design Week, we did have quite a strong representation from Yelp's design team there for our week-long conference. And that was about 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. And we even had we even had folks on panels. Tobia joined us on the design systems panel. Catherine moderated one of the panels on design leadership in a remote environment. And so today we are getting another sneak peek, a more detailed view into how design happens at Yelp across different teams. So it's not just one massive design team, but there are actually quite a few different product design teams. And hopefully we get to learn more about how design's placed in those teams, what kind of opportunities are there, what does a designer's career path look like, when if and when you would join Yelp's design team. So Josh heads consumer design at Yelp, and he'll be helping us answer many of these questions. And if you were not at Remote Design Week, Yelp is hiring for more than 12 product design roles, and that is a lot. So what's happening? Let's let's find out with Josh. So let's welcome him on the stream. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Bree. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining in. Really excited, not just for the AMA session, but also that we get to host you, someone that we didn't get to see at the conference. We had Madhav co-emceeing the day with me, quite a few other design leaders uh, joining us, and also get a little bit of a sneak peek into your journey as a designer, as a design leader. And I know it's not been a journey just specific to design. So I think it'll be amazing to get a little bit of introduction on about you and your journey so far.
Sure, yeah. So, as many of you guessed, I'm not originally from San Francisco. I grew up in a small town in Australia called Devonport, Tasmania. If anyone's been there, major props. I would be very impressed. But I think when I was going through, I didn't really even think of design as a career option. I guess design was like working at the local print shop or the Kinko's. That was what I thought of design. But I went to college to get a real degree on my parents' request in computer science. And out of that fell into sort of making websites on the side for friends, and then eventually kind of grew that into a little agency that did video and websites. And I sort of fell into this nascent industry of website design. And I was doing a lot of video stuff as well at the time. I actually was a TV director really early in my career. But TV is a lot of work compared to website design and video. And I kind of shied away from that and focused on websites. Did some startups, worked for my sort of earliest big career was at Lonely Planet, the travel company, which some of you may have heard of. And that's when I had my first real product design job, and sort of was really doing apps and websites and all sorts of stuff. That's also how I got over to America. They moved to Nashville, so that was another interesting adventure to move to another country and follow my career there. And one thing led to another, and I had a career pivot and moved into product management at Google after that. So my career's taken a bunch of curves and winding roads, and I'm happy to just talk about that a little bit more. And I was at Google for a couple of years as a PM, joined Yelp as a PM, and I realized I don't actually like being a PM that much, and then went back to the design area at Yelp. Our team was very nascent there when I joined Yelp. There was about, I think, 5 to 10 designers on the design team. So it's been a really crazy journey. I've been there for 6 years in January, seeing that design team go from a literal handful of designers through to the 60 something I think we have today, building out all the teams that come with that, and managers, and our design systems team, our research team, our writing team. And now today, like you mentioned, I manage the consumer team, and also our XD team, which is sort of a code name we gave for design systems and UX writing and program management. So that's me today.
Wow. That's quite an incredible journey. How did in between, you mentioned when you were at Lonely Planet, is that when the transition from design to product management happened?
Yeah, it's funny. So I think, like probably many people here, it was sort of an internal agency, and very much an agency. I was working for clients, and I got sick of other people telling me what to design. I was like, if I could make the decisions about what we did, like I then I'd finally get to like create these great user-focused products and all that sort of stuff. And I think I saw product management as this, that'll give me an opportunity to do that. So I moved into a product development role at Lonely Planet, which then got me a job at Google as a PM. But it was under that pretense of like, I wanted to be the one that had a bit more influence over what we built.
Right, and that's often I've definitely had similar emotions or thoughts. When working at some product companies, even agencies. I think apart from like influence, definitely is a big kind of motivator, and the other one is also, I think, as product designers, there's so much of overlap that happens in the day-to-day tasks and activities you do between the PM and designer, and that's so fluid, right? Like it's so depends on the two individuals working together. So many times it feels like you're already living point 0.5 of a PM's
Yeah.
role slash
And
life.
it's funny you describe it like that, because I think when I eventually made the decision to switch back to design, I realized like that 0.5, like the other 0.5,
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy any of it. Like I moved over to this PM role, and I'm like, hey, this is actually not. I don't. All that stuff that I used to like the design part, I wasn't doing anymore, and the part that I that I had to do all of a sudden, I was like, and I had a great manager at the time, and he's like, and we were talking about my career, and he said to me, he's like, Josh, like you're an okay PM, but I think you'd be a great designer. And it was like hard truth to hear at the time, but it was such a light bulb moment of like, oh yeah, like I don't like any parts of this PM role, and I don't get to do any of those parts that I thought I enjoyed. So that was a real eye-opening experience for me.
Right. That's so funny. And so now when you look back, like, do you think that decision you made like drastically changed your career path for the better, or
yeah,
not
for
so good?
sure. And it's funny. I agonized over this decision for a long time. Even when I was at Google, and then when I joined Yelp, I was like, I think, is this the right job for me? I wasn't loving the PM role, but I'm like, I don't know if I want to go back to design. And then like 2 weeks into running the moving back to design, the design team, we had a design manager leave, and I jumped into that role. It was very bumpy, of course, but like it was literally 2 weeks where I'm like, oh, this is definitely the right decision. Like it was night and day when I actually started doing it and working with the design team, that I was like, no, this is definitely what I should be doing. So yeah, it's definitely added a lot more certainty to my career path. I still enjoy working and collaborating closely with the product counterparts, but I'm happy that we have other people to deal with. I have a really great product counterpart at Yelp, and I see the problems he tackles, and I'm like, I'm glad I've got him to do that. And I think the influence, the tiny little bit of influence I maybe lost by not being on PM, like you can get very close to making it up with a great relationship with your product partner, and I don't regret that decision at all.
Right, right. And again, for folks watching the stream, like I definitely have a few more questions on just this topic, but please do share, because it's also do share your questions too, and curiosities, because this is a conversation that has come up often in our Slack community, where the more senior experienced a designer gets, they start to think, I think influence definitely has come up as the main motivator, where they're like, okay, should I start heading into a product role? Because also in many of the teams, you see design rolling under product. So folks start to see their lead designers, or design managers start to see their career path could be altered towards head of product or something. So we often, like generally in the community, in job descriptions, you see many companies, there's this aspirational skill set combination for design and development, and that comes up a lot. Even when you say design a unicorn, everyone thinks design and like a designer who can code, right? You don't often hear as a kind of aspirational quality about having the ideal mix of or experience from a design and product lens. Do you think that's because we are already doing or living that role, so that's why it's not as aspirational, or the roles are quite distinct?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you hit the nail on the head. If like it's a part of the job, and it changes depending on the company and the makeup and how large or small your product team is. But I think certainly at larger companies, Yelp is one of these companies. And some engineering knowledge is super helpful, but it's definitely not required. Back in the day when I started in the career, you would sort of, I feel like every design job ad was like, must know a little bit of CSS or a little bit of JavaScript or a little bit of HTML. I think that for the larger companies at least has mostly gone away. And there are interesting hybrid roles for some companies that have built like these companies around hybrid designers and engineers. But I think it's more optional now, whereas like so at nearly every company, I think you've got to have some product skills as a designer to interface with those. And like you've got to be able to sort of like at least understand and talk to metrics, even if you don't deeply know how they work underneath that. You want, in order to have influence, you've got to develop those skills. Otherwise, you sort of be like in that position of people telling you what to do, and you're not empowered to debate that. So I think you're right that it's more of an implied precondition rather than an optional part.
Right. That's very true. So after you got into product, you went to Google, and Google, I think you were solely in product through your
That's right.
almost 2 years that you were there. And then from there, you started like you went to, I think, Eat24. Was that part of the Yelp family?
Yeah, so they'd just been acquired by Yelp at the time.
Okay.
So it was still within Yelp. It was a part of Yelp, but it was operated a little bit independently, like a sub team.
Right. So then, you're at Google. What were some of the kind of the biggest reasons that you decided to move? Because again, at least in our community, generally you still see these larger tech giants. FANG used to be the acronym. Of course, I think I don't know, it's people call it Mango, whatever. It's changed to now.
They like add and remove and a layer depending on whose stock price is going.
Yeah. So it's like a very aspirational companies. And then of course, Yelp is still one of the larger companies, but it's like, okay, you were at Google. What was the big inspiration or reasons to switch roles?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel very grateful that I got the opportunity to work for Google, because I was always, as a kid, a Google fanboy. I like bought my Gmail invite. This is aging me, but I bought my Gmail invite for like $10 on eBay before they were publicly released. So that was always like a dream company, and I've always loved travel, and that was the team I was on at Google as well. So it was one of those sort of like I always wanted to like do the tech thing in San Francisco. So it was one of those like, oh my god, I'm living the dream kind of thing. So I was
Yeah.
really, and it was great. Like I did actually really enjoy my time. I reflect on that a lot. That I'm like, I wonder how much it was that I wasn't that the role I was in wasn't a good fit for me, or like was it more about
Mm,
Google or was it more about the product role? And if I joined as a
right.
designer, and that's where I think Yelp is really great because like Google is a good example of those really big companies, really big, sort of
Mm,
very structured, lots of ladders. And I think something
mm,
I've loved at Yelp is like they allowed me to explore this. I
mm.
said I had that conversation with my boss, right? And I'm like, I think I might want to be a designer again. And they really encourage that, and sort of like
Mm,
there's been a lot of stories with a few of us that have jumped around teams in different roles and things like that. And I think like
mm,
there's probably a world where if that was easier to do at Google, I might even still be there. But I really love
mm,
I got this opportunity. Also, like it's nice to the I've got so inspired since I joined Yelp about the local business angle. Like that's something that I just love that Yelp is there to support. So I think that
mm,
that was
mm,
I
mm.
didn't realize at the time, to be honest, when I joined 824, I'm like, oh, I'm not in a great fit role. I'll find something else.
Yeah.
But I really like this new focus area compared to like the big
Mm.
tech giant thing.
Right, right. There's a really good a segue into talking about some of the teams. So you mentioned, like at Yelp, there's the opportunity, or you've had similar folks move around teams. Could you give us a little bit of idea of like, what are some of the kind of the larger teams that also have design as a function on them?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So it's been really interesting because that, like I said when I started, there was like 5 to 10 people. So it was like, and,
Mm,
and really like we operated mostly as a bit of a more like agency model. Like product managers or others would tell us they needed a mock and we'd create it, and there wasn't much
mm,
influence there. So it's been interesting building out this product design org over the last few years.
mm,
I won't go into too much detail because I think it becomes overwhelming. But at a high level, you can think of the teams in these sort of buckets, and we
mm,
map them very closely to our product and engineering org. So you've got that
mm,
partnership, but we've
mm,
got our consumer team, which is mine.
mm,
The consumer team, like, is probably what if you're an average user of Yelp, you would think of when you use Yelp. Like that's the products
mm,
we use to find businesses and all of the related features. We've got our business team, which I think actually a lot of people don't know as much about, but actually
mm,
it's as large as they're the two largest teams at all of Yelp. The business
mm,
team I think might even be a tiny bit larger, but they're the teams, to that comment that you flashed up. They're the ones that are really building all these products for our local business owners. So we've got an app and
mm,
a way to manage your page and a bunch of complicated products there to help support local business owners.
mm,
And then we've got our restaurants team. That's a focus team that I think one of their
mm,
primary focuses is those tools that restaurants owners use to like manage
mm,
tables, and they also
mm,
manage the consumer side as well. But they're a focus team. They work really closely with our sales team, and they operate a little bit
mm,
independently. And then we've got our multi-lot team, which focuses on the bigger, not just chain businesses, but larger multi-location places like
mm,
Tim Hortons and stuff like that is an
mm,
obvious
mm,
example. But there's also like smaller places like micro chains, we call them, where they've got
mm,
like 2 or 3 places. So that's a big emerging market for Yelp and a big
mm,
opportunity for us to better support those types of businesses.
mm,
So they're sort of the high level product and engineering orgs, those 4 teams. And then we've also got within the design team, we've got our XD team, which stands for
mm,
cross-functional design, and that's sort of systems, UX writing, program management, those teams that support the rest of the product design org doing their best work. And we've
mm,
also got our research team, which is
mm.
really great out in the last few years, and they obviously help support our research efforts across the business. So that's sort of the simplified view of those teams, and yeah, does that sort of answer the question? I can go into
Yeah.
more detail as well if you'd like, but that's a high level view.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that definitely helps. And so you would say design, when you were earlier talking about almost a design team, about 60 folks strong. Is that kind of like evenly distributed, or is there one part of the business where the concentration of design or research is more?
We try and map pretty closely to our product and engineering orgs, just
Okay.
so we've got that partnership. So it's sort of, but I'd say those consumer and the biz teams are the largest teams.
Okay.
I'd get the numbers wrong, and someone would yell at me if I tried to throw out numbers. But they're the larger teams, and then the restaurants and the multi-business, the multi-location team are sort of smaller, and then the systems team is, or the XD team is focused mostly with designers and people within product design, so that's smaller again.
Right. That makes sense. So now, when we start looking at some of the cultural aspects, rituals, even more of the like the processes, workflow aspect, is there a lot of variance between the two teams? Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny, like one of the things I really like about Yelp is that we generally have a really strong, what I call a bottoms up culture. So we don't get a lot of like, this is how we're doing things, this is what you have to work on, top down. It's really, you're empowered to, and that flows through to team rituals and process and things like that. So certainly in the earlier days, everyone did pretty different things. And it's only now that we've got to develop our teams, I think we're a little bit like, hey, like maybe there's some value in like I love stealing ideas from the other design managers, and I'm like, hey, you run your triage meetings like this, or you run your whatever meeting like that, or this is how you approach crits. Like we're constantly borrowing those ideas. So we've sort of culturally developed similar working styles, but the actual and we use the same tool underneath it, for instance, like most of the time. But that's a good example. Not all of our teams necessarily. Some of us use Jira, and some of us might use a different management tool and things like that. Which like it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and I think that's a good theme for Yelp. Is like we're not so big that it's dictated like you have to use this one tool, which might not be perfect for your team. But also, like sometimes I'm like, gee, I wish there was just like an easy way to see like what we're all working on. But it's that balancing act, and I personally like it because it means like we and the managers on my team can run the teams the way we want. But I will say, culturally, what I also love about the design team is like we have this real sense of design team identity and culture. I think it's come from having that really tiny design team, and it's changing and evolving now that we've grown. But I think that core design team that sort of lived and worked through this growth period from going to 5 to 30, I think a lot of us have made really tight bonds with each other, and there's a sense of like design unity from being in the trenches together when things are tough. And that's also something I really value from Yelp. It's like we obviously have great relationships with our product and engineering counterparts, but there's also a sense of like the design team has a sense of identity and community by itself. And we do offsites, and we used to do them physically, and now we do them virtually, and there's that socialization aspect that happens across the design team, which is a really nice mixing of both worlds, that you've got your kind of product team, and that has its own kind of customs and approaches and processes, and then you've got the wider design team, which is nice.
Right. That's really interesting. And even when you were mentioning, like again, going from being that small team, less than 5 folks, and then kind of scaling those rituals, processes, workflows. Has a lot of that happened in the last, like since almost like COVID kicked in, or has the growth been quite gradual?
It's a good question. I might get the timing wrong. This is how I think about it. So I might emphasize it. There was a period of time before COVID where we added, I think, like what I would call our first layer of management. So that was there was me and another design manager leading our biz team. It was the consumer and biz team mostly. And that was, I think, the first stage of evolution of like really investing in our design leadership, and with that first line of like management. And then Kelly, our VP, joined shortly after that, just before COVID hit. And I think that really, Kelly brings such a wealth of experience from a bunch of different companies. And I think that really matured our design org. And that's when I think we got another layer of management. We really built out our research team. We built out our systems team. So, and then I think that maybe the third phase, which is like later in COVID, is once we've embraced this remote nature, we've really started hiring in different places. I think someone might have to correct me here in the background, but I think the Toronto office is technically our largest product design office now. So like that's brought a whole different set of challenges around, like we've got a whole group of new people with, we're going to spread some of that design culture I talked about to our new offices, which is, hard when you're not in the same location. So it's almost like 3 phases of like we've got managers now, and now we've got a
mm,
VP, and we've got like a real design org, and now we've
mm.
got this distributed design org at the later half of COVID, and that's sort of the stage of evolution we're in now, is figuring out how these offices and teams all work together.
Right, right. Yeah, at Remote Design Week, I learned that part where the GTA, Greater Toronto Area team size is, yeah, a little bit larger than the San Francisco team size. And I definitely, being in Toronto, like I was totally not aware of that. So it definitely was a really pleasant surprise. Like it was like, wow, that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting, but I was here before we even made the decision to hire in Toronto, and there was definitely this
yeah.
fear of like, are there product designers in Toronto?
Yeah.
Like, this was never hired there. And I would definitely say, like, we've hired so many awesome people in the
Hmm.
GTA. I never
Yeah.
that acronym never sounds natural to me though. But the GTA area,
Yeah.
like we've had so many amazing people. It's been so
Hmm.
lovely to realize wow, like we've got all these talented people distributed across the world now, which was a great reassurance.
Yeah. Yeah. That actually, and we have about two questions from the audience, which I'll plug in just a moment. So two things you just mentioned, you talked about the team being so distributed now, and also you talked about the maturity, right? Like the team maturing really fast, especially since your VP Kelly joined the team. So what would you say, from your lens, has been the toughest part, to manage? It could be on the culture part, could be on more of the processes, tooling, workflow part, that you're trying to tackle, or you've almost solved it, or you're still looking.
The first thing that comes to mind when you say that, and it's a cliche thing, and I'm sure many of you people here would have understood this. It's the like design having a seat at the table thing.
Mm,
And
mm,
I think we've made there's always progress to be made there. But if I
mm,
think of that team of 5 to 10 people, 6 years ago, and
mm,
how they operated with the business compared to
mm,
like how it operates now, um, I think most of our teams now there's true partnership on the product and design side.
mm,
We have a voice with our product
mm,
counterparts. We
mm,
really we have an annual planning process, for example, and I think design really literally has a invite to the meetings, and also figuratively has that
mm,
seat at the table and the partnership. And I think that's been one of the, if I think about what maybe some of the frustrations were and why people left the design team early on, it was things
mm,
like that we were
mm,
being forced to work on really small incremental features from the product
mm,
org. And now we've got our design managers, and not just managers, our leads and our seniors, really driving visions for our team. And I think I'm biased, of course, and I don't know what my product managers would say here when we say this, but like, I think our team is the one that really drives the longer term vision for Yelp. And
mm,
that's been so
mm,
exciting for product design to go from like, hey, make me this mock of this button, to like, hey,
mm,
here's where we think we should go in 3 to 5
mm,
years. And then
mm,
working really closely with the product managers to make that happen. I think that's been
mm,
something personally I found really rewarding, to see the design team grow in that way.
mm, mm. That's really, uh yeah, kind of falls right into all the things you mentioned around how the team's been scaling and the impact they've been having. Um and that's also part of the some of the questions that came up, even when I share with folks, like, oh, Yelp's design team seems to be growing like crazy. There is a lot of curiosity around, like, okay, what's triggering that growth, right? So you mentioned right now, because again, I think when you have such a large platform, there are both sides. Like, yes, even those small tweaks you're gonna do impact millions of people. So it's still really important, to design those details and nuances of the experience really well. And then on the other hand, yeah, you have those kind of like, long future vision. I don't know, any kind of the major products or redesigns or revamps coming up that, of course, folks out there are not aware of. Are there things you can share, uh, that are causing this like big growth on the design team right now, from a
I think,
roadmap perspective?
yeah, I think a big part of it was we started from behind a little bit. Like, we were
Mm,
understaffed because we
mm,
didn't have really senior design leaders back in the day. I don't think there was
mm,
anyone I don't think we did a good job showcasing the value that product design could bring to the table. And I think,
Mm,
I was one. I don't hold it against any product managers, but they're not designers. They don't know
mm,
what design does. If they're
mm,
like, oh, design's the one that like makes my features like they
mm,
make it pretty and they mock it up so the engineers can build
mm,
it. Like if that's
yeah.
what they've been told, then of course they're gonna
Mm,
like deliver you these specs and things like that.
mm, mm,
But I think a big thing of what we did was like, hey, you can get a way more value from your product design team if you bring them in
mm,
early and we agree on the problem area. You let them focus on
mm,
the solution, and maybe you
mm,
let us drive workshops and visioning exercises, and we
mm,
can like. And I must say our product team's been awesome partners in this because like I think at other places people have having this experience of like,
mm,
oh, we don't have time for you to go and do a workshop for 3 days, or no, you
mm,
have to execute on this mock and we don't have time for any visioning or research. And I think
mm,
it's been great. They've given us a lot of freedom of being like, hey, I think it goes hand in hand. Like I think we've proven ourselves a little bit and built that trust. And then it's like, okay, if you say this is important, like you sure spend the
right.
time. Comes from that bottom up culture of like just being able to show the value of design at a higher level. I think
Mm,
suddenly once you start doing it, everyone's like, we need more designers. Like we had a lot in my team, our engineering managers are like, no, I'd rather use one of my headcount for a designer than an engineering, which is
right.
such a like nice thing to hear. It's like
Yeah.
that's such a symbolic gesture that design's having an impact that they're like, no, we want a designer instead of an engineer. And I
Yeah.
think that coupled with like Yelp's been going through a lot of growth in the last 18 months or so as we
Mm,
got out of the worst of COVID and we're building
mm,
back up and we're growing our team in Toronto. So I think it was that first phase of hiring came from that like, wow, design has value. Let's get more of them in here. And then the second phase has come with just like Yelp growing as a business.
mm,
We took it down. We had a hard few months there at the start of COVID because we weren't sure what was going to happen with the
mm,
economy and how it's going to affect local businesses, which of course affects Yelp. And then sort of we've come through that and businesses starting to thrive again. We're there to
mm.
help them. And I think that's triggered a lot of growth of our various teams as we've sort of seen more opportunity there.
That's really exciting. And yeah, as someone, Hannah, I think I mentioned about the not thinking about the support for local businesses part. So that's again, yeah, and an aspect, an area of impact. That's I think, yeah, sometimes even I don't think about when I think of Yelp that yeah, most of these platforms are kind of dependent on you, or like a lot of the traffic, in fact, is being driven because of Yelp, which
Yeah,
is really.
it's interesting coming in from. I've always focused on consumer product and
Mm,
definitely Yelp. I'm like, oh yeah, I got to make a great way to search for local businesses, and
yeah.
it did take me a few years. And I think even Yelp, maybe we put our business owners on the back. Like it was sort of like, yeah, we need to support our business owners, but like
Mm,
mostly we need to make a great consumer product. And I think
mm,
in the last few years I think we realized we maybe underinvested on the business owner side a bit, and there's so
mm,
much value we can bring them and so much help. And
mm,
you speak to business owners, Yelp sometimes has a mixed reputation, and it's been a great like pivot there for us. Maybe a mini pivot to be
mm,
like, we actually really want to focus on supporting those business owners. Like they're the lifeblood of
mm,
our community, and ultimately it
mm.
doesn't matter how good your search and discovery and consumer experience is. If there's no businesses in your neighborhood, we can't do anything. So like
Yeah.
fostering the growth of local communities and supporting owners
Mm,
and helping them get started and thrive through COVID. I think that's a really exciting part of the business owner side of Yelp.
right. Right. That was really well said. I think that last line about the impact and fostering the local businesses in your neighborhood part should be kind of at the top of every careers page on Yelp. Like the
Yeah,
impact part, because I think that's what drives also designers, especially more than our counterparts. Like the impact part inspires us to join a team. Leave jobs at like fancy name companies, and
yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's funny. Something I see from some candidates is they'll come in and they'll be like, "Oh, I don't want to work on the biz side," because they've come from B2B companies where like
Right.
biz has been shorthand for you're working
Mhm.
for a sales team. Like, and
Right.
that's actually not our biz team at all. Our biz team is like it's a different user segment, right? It's our
Mm,
business owners, and like
mm,
in many ways, to be honest, there's more opportunities there than on the consumer side because
mm,
it's such like
mm,
there's so many people in need of help.
mm, mm,
So I think
mm.
it's interesting talking to candidates coming through there because I think they're like, I don't want to work on the business side. I don't want to work B2B. I'm like, there's some of our most exciting problems and opportunities are
Right.
on the biz side. And having that, it's the same user focus needed to like
Mm.
understand those owners, find out what their needs are, build great solutions for them. I think it's, yeah. I mean, I'm biased. Consumer's my baby. I will love consumer always, but I do think the biz team is working on some really interesting problems.
Yeah, yeah. It's also I think a space that is a little more underserved when you look at competition out there, like
Exactly.
because of the tech adoption in general of these small businesses. They've always been kind of like deprioritized, almost like, oh, these folks are not going to get an app or have a website or
Yeah, less
uh,
and less now. I think a lot of
yeah.
places are catching up, and there's some amazing
Mm.
tools out there. But I think my James, who heads our research department, sent an interesting stat on Slack last night. And I don't know how validated this is. Don't quote me on this, but it's something like 63% of new business owners are in an area or an industry that they've never been in before, which is just mind blowing to me. Of like that all these new business owners
Right.
are not just starting a new business; they're starting it in a new area. Like they're leaving whatever their last job was and starting this new type of business and a new thing. And I'm just like, that's so telling of how much we need to help. Like there's so much
Right.
opportunity to be like,
Right.
how can we help you follow your dream? And for me, it's like start my coffee shop one day. That's my non-tech job at some point.
It's it's so funny you shared that example, because I was just gonna say I found out this week, early this week, that my coffee shop, neighborhood coffee shop, the owner used to be a tech recruiter. And so when I was talking to him, he was like, yeah, I was traveling a lot for recruitment for this large company and I was not interested. And I opened a coffee shop. So
Yeah.
I think James definitely has the stat might be
Yeah,
accurate.
coffee shop's good. It's
Yeah.
like if you made it really big in tech, you open a winery, and then if you go a
Yeah.
step out, it's a restaurant. And for me, I think coffee shop is probably
Yeah.
where I'm aiming.
That's amazing. Okay, I've been long holding on some of these questions, so uh, I hope I don't really butcher the name pronunciation. So Johnny is asking, do you look for different skills when hiring for the XT team over other product areas? So XT
Yeah,
meaning experience design team. Just so
yeah, we
some
need a
folks don't.
better name for that. It's
Yeah.
like it actually means cross-function design. Like, if anyone
Right.
has any good proposals for what systems, program management, and writing can be called, please ping me.
Right.
So yeah, definitely is the short answer. Thanks for the
Mm.
question, Gianni. So sometimes it's a totally different skill set, right? Like that's where our UX writers and our program managers will live. So
Mm.
that's an entirely different job role. But even our product designers, Chris is leads our design systems team, for instance, and that role especially, we do look for quite a different skill set, and we usually actually advertise it differently. Because the systems designer, if you're coming in and building a design system and the role that does versus the product team, it is quite different. And for example, I think it's interesting because systems designers can be very broad in different ways, but like we want to make sure that they can kind of be really deep, like understand how to like make decisions about components, and we kind of want pretty good strong visual design skills. Something I've loved is I'm not a good strong visual designer at all. Like UI has never been my strength, and it's been so good to have Chris and team there like build this amazing system, so like designers that are weaker on visual design like myself
Yeah.
can use this system. And I think that's just one example of where like we hire skills for that team. It's also got some interesting like that you don't have to do all this collaboration with product as much, so they tend to collaborate with their engineers a lot closer. It's actually one of those teams where a little bit of engineering knowledge can sometimes be helpful because you're
Mm.
making decisions around how your components are built and things like that. So that can be actually pretty helpful to have just a touch of engineering knowledge on XT. Oh, Preet, you dropped out. Is that me?
Oh, sorry,
Oh,
that was me. um, I said, hope that was helpful, Johnny. Yeah, Johnny just mentioned. Thanks, Josh. We have another question from Hannah, and that's around research. So, could you share a little more about how research is placed, how teams collaborate?
yeah. So we don't have an embedded model just because of our capacity. Like our new research is probably I think the newest UX writing, I guess, is newer, but research is still only been around for a couple of years. I think everyone, and it's been really great to see that team grow and really own that space and develop a strong team. I love our research counterparts.
Mm,
So they have a separate team, but within each team, they sort of dedicate someone on their team to one of the product teams. Or like mostly dedicate. So I've got someone on consumer, for instance, who leads a lot of our research projects. And the way we do it at Yelp, which I actually like this model of, we'll have like high priority research projects, the really complex ones. Maybe it's quant, maybe it's just we're doing a really kind of in-depth qualitative study now about how consumers interact with Yelp. And our research counterpart will usually lead that and run that and do an amazing job with it. But then another part of their responsibilities is just like empowering our product designers to do great
mm,
research. So they have office hours where you can bring
mm,
research, you can just get some training about how to do a good interview. And I think that's been
mm,
really great, because I think then I think it's such an important part of the product designer's role is to talk to users. You don't want to like completely hand that
mm,
off, right? You want to be able to get some of that yourself. So it's been great to have
mm,
research, and we've got like honestly one of the best researchers. I had a research ops person, so like we've got some help with just getting that work, as many of you understand, of like
mm,
finding the
mm,
right people, getting them
mm,
on site, virtually on site, and
mm, mm.
screening them. Like it's so much work, and we've got some ops people on the research team to help with that. So that's another way that they'll collaborate.
That's really cool. Um, so, Josh, you just mentioned about almost like a few cross-functional skills that you already kind of have seen on your team and the impact they can have. So, designers, also being able to help with research or even conduct research at times. And then I think earlier you were also mentioning about visual design skills, strong UI skills, and how that can be really really helpful. I think maybe first you could share like what are some of these roles that you're hiring for, like are there any research roles, are there any specific UI design focused roles, and then what are some of these skills that you would say are currently um, not absent from the team, but skills that you would like to have more of. So if someone is applying, what would help them stand out from other applicants? What kind of skill sets would you say should be
Yeah,
highlighted?
yeah. Maybe I can tackle that in two parts. I think we've got a variety of roles open. You can definitely check out our careers page to see the
Mhm.
exact open roles. But I'd also say we've I think we hired over 20 people last year. It might have even been 30. Again, don't quote me
Wow.
on that number. But like I think everyone's going through this period of like change, and
Mm,
teams are evolving as
mm,
we kind of figure out what we do with our lives after COVID. So I'd say like I think we have about 4 product design roles open, for example, on that list of 12. And I think they're mostly at the senior to lead level. There's a couple of lower level ones. So it's a bit of a mix, but I'd say like it changes and evolves all the time. So like check back often if you're interested, if you're like a new grad or you're maybe just beginning your career. If there's not something that you're an exact fit for, like don't let that turn you off. So the other way, we generally hire generalist designers. Like I said, it's funny. I say like I don't know if I get a job at Yelp anymore with my visual design skills. So you don't have to be amazing at everything, but we want you to be able to be flexible enough to do everything. We don't have like a specialist UI role and a specialist UX role, and I personally think that's good, because I think those roles merge together a lot, especially when you're in a big tech company with a system and things like that. So I think one of the things that we look for at Yelp, which I don't think is unique, but I think is important, is we call it ownership, and it's sort of some of the things I've been touching on before. When you've got this culture of like you're empowered to make decisions, and like we kind of expect that of you. You don't have to be like a VP to be the one deciding on things. This sense of like, will you come in and have an opinion about the product and the design and where you want to take it? I think that's actually a really important skill that we interview for. We have these 5 pillars on our interview process, and that's one of them. Um, and then so if you've got that breadth of skills, and like we sort of hire those more generalist type roles and fit you in. That's changing a little bit as we grow big. We're big enough now, like I said, that we have this systems team, so we can be like, occasionally we have a role in systems where it is something like, hey, we kind of want you to have had some systems experience and things like that. But generally the bulk of our designers can flex to all different areas. I think you had a second part to your question as well, which is like what about the interview process.
Not about the interview process. I think my current question was more around the skill set part. Um, but it would be helpful to get a little bit of sneak peek into the different parts of the interview process.
Yeah. So we've definitely evolved that and changed that. So usually the interview process at a high level starts with a phone screen with someone on our recruiting team, and they'll chat to you about the role and just sort of like check basic eligibility stuff, make sure that it's a fit for what you're looking for and it's fit for what we're looking for. That's where you can have some of those early conversations around like, like there's nothing the exact right level for you right now, but like, can we reach out in a month when we might have something? That's when those conversations take place. And then there'll be a phone interview, a virtual conversation with one of the product designers, usually a hiring manager, where we just want to know a little bit more about your design background, and we might talk to you about something in your portfolio. We don't get you to present it or anything. Again, it's a conversation with a designer a little bit about like, this is what the Yelp design team's like. We talk about a lot of the things we're talking about today in that conversation, and then it's also a chance for us to get to know you and sort of make sure that I think the way I love to think about recruiting is it's not about us accepting you. It's about fit. It's a two-way conversation. So I want to make sure that like Yelp is going to be a good fit for what you want as much as you're going to be a good fit for what Yelp wants. And then we have like a structured panel interview. I think there's 4 conversations there, with starting with a portfolio presentation to the rest of the people that are going to be on the panel, where you'll present 2 pieces of work. And then you'll have a conversation with the hiring manager, like the manager one-on-one. You'll chat to one of the designers on the team, and you'll do what we call a design thinking exercise, which is sort of, it used to be whiteboarding when we used to get to do that. And we've sort of got some questions there to substitute for that whiteboarding experience, where we just, the way I encourage people to think of the entire interview process is like, just imagine it's a chat with a fellow colleague or like another designer at a bar or a cafe. And I think that's what it's meant to be, is more of a like, hey, are we a good fit? Is this going to work out? Like, that's the right way to think. People get very stressed about the interview process, and the people that tend to do best are the ones that are like, you're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. And I think like coming in with that mindset can be helpful.
That's amazing that you said that that it is a two-way street. Because mostly it does feel like a one-way thing, and that you're just the only one interviewing. I think just yesterday I was reading this this tweet where someone tweeted out that a company's usually like, give me 2 or 3 references so we can cross-check, and they were like, why can't candidates be like, okay, you give me 2-3 references of happy employees or people on your team that also
And honestly, that's why we do our panels that way, because like
right.
you get to speak to another designer that's doing a very similar role, and you get to speak to the person that hopefully is your manager, or at least a manager at Yelp, and you get to ask them questions about Yelp. So yeah, I think I definitely like that approach of like, you're interviewing it, you're doing a reference check on us.
Yeah. Very true. So we have quite an interesting question by our friend Jonathan from Toronto. So Jonathan's asking, being a publicly traded company, how does the constant drive for adding shareholder value impact the client experience roadmap?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's difficult. It's one of the most difficult parts of certainly my job, I think, is and I share this with our product counterparts, is when you've got this drive to produce quarterly results and hit like the pressure on hitting metrics, when you say to Wall Street, hey, we're going to hit this next year. Like, if you don't hit it, that's a big deal. So what I really, this goes back to that product question we talked about PMs, of like, I really give our product team a lot of value for spending time to translate, consumer experience or client experience, as Jonathan says it, to metrics. Because I think like we've got a really great BizOps team and our product team. So if you basically need to do all this work to translate something like, is it a better experience, to we're going to improve retention by X percentage points, and that's going to drive X dollars in revenue for the business. And like, I'm glad I don't have to answer that question, because like I do not know how to do that. But I think the teams and the companies that are successful managed to do that and managed to make Wall Street sort of care that like your moving retention has real impact, or like investing in your brand can have revenue impact down the road, and modeling that and coming up with numbers for it. But it's never perfect. I think that's the challenge. Like, it's a beautiful imaginary world we live in where that could be like bulletproof, where you've always got a metric that always maps to the user experience. I think they tend to be the hardest conversations, where it's like, we know this is good for the user and we spoke to someone and we're really confident about it, but we just can't like measure it right now in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you tend to get into all those like heated debates with the product and the business side. And that's, I think that's a reality of being a publicly traded company, and we can always improve there. I think I give my product team on the consumer team a lot of credit. They've invested a lot in this over the last year, and I think we've now got a really healthy way of joining those two worlds. It's not perfect. There's always gaps, but it's not like you've got the design team being like, experience matters, and you've got the product and business team saying, no, revenue matters. It's more like those two things have been mapped together, which I think is the place where most public companies want to be at, because that's what drives revenue in the long term, right? Like, you create this experience, you create a healthy, successful company, and that's what's going to drive value for your shareholders in the long run.
Right. Spot on. that was incredibly helpful. Jonathan, hopefully that answered the question. Great question again.
It's a funny trade-off sometimes. I'm like,
yeah,
because I've worked at both, where it's like just like a private company with a CEO, and they get to decide to do whatever they want, and I'm like, that's really, sometimes I'm like, that's nice, because at the end of the day, it's like, whatever they decide, like, we can disagree. But it also comes with trade-offs, right? Because you're like, when you disagree with that person, that becomes problematic. It's like nothing's perfect. But it's a trade-off.
So true. There's definitely a strong feedback mechanism on this side with stronger repercussions. Absolutely. Okay, so as Josh, we are coming close to the end of our session. There's one part of the office hours, the AMA part, which I did not get to touch upon a lot. So if we can spend the last few minutes just learning a little bit about we talked a lot about like how design is placed in the org, how different teams, how design is embedded or works across different teams, different functions within the design org as well. But if we zoom in a little more and could talk a little bit about a designer's path within the org, what kind of like growth, and learning opportunities that exist within the teams. So again, being part of a larger org, a larger team comes with a lot of different stereotypes depending on what team you think about, whether you join a large bank versus you join a large scale up company. So how is it at Yelp for a designer that suppose watched our AMA today, applied for a job, joined the team in a month?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it goes back to sort of some of the things I said I really like about Yelp, of like, we do have like a career ladder and levels, and there's that, like, at some point there's a branch between principal and manager, and there's like, you can climb the ladder, like you can just follow those rungs if you want. That's nothing wrong with that. But I think in general, the way I encourage people, all of my team, to think about it is, I'm like, don't think about like, what is the path at Yelp? Think about like, what is the path you want? Like, what do you want out of your career? And I think a lot of us don't spend enough time thinking about like, where do I want to get to in 5 or 10 years? It's such a cliched question, but it's like so many of us have difficulty answering that question. I think something I work on, and a lot of our managers work on with our team, is like helping people go through that journey. There's a great book, Designing Your Life. If anyone here hasn't read it, and is wondering about their longer term career, I highly recommend it. But I think that's where I start, of more like, where do you want to be? Like, if you want to be a design, a CDO, a chief design officer in 15, 20 years, great. Let's map that back. Let's get you on the manager path. Let's grow you into a senior and a lead and give you manager responsibilities. We'll work on all those things like mentoring. If you're like, actually, I just want to like, I think I want to be an illustrator one day, or like I want to just like work on projects and not deal with this other stuff. Or maybe you want like a hybrid role, a player coach role. Maybe you want something completely outside of the design industry, like me, like switching to PM, or some other people switching to research and things like that. Like, I think Yelp is a great place to sort of like have that flexibility to adapt your career and work with your manager on it. Because whilst we do have the more traditional, like, you can go up the levels and things like that. I think we like to customize people's careers path for what really works for them. I think I'm the poster child for this in my career at Yelp
Yeah.
because I've switched around. But I definitely think we do a pretty good job of being like, hey, like what do you want, and how can Yelp give you that, instead of like how can you fit into this predefined structure that Yelp has defined.
That's amazing. And yeah, I mean, most companies that we host, yes, they all share, the framework, the ladders framework that they have for the career paths. But I love that, you mentioned that you definitely are the poster child. You've mapped your career as you figured out, where you want to go. And yeah, that's not something you hear quite often. That level of flexibility and kind of focus on the human and not the labels that we've charted in the org.
I
So
think that's
that's
like to close that thought out. I think that's where Yelp is the go back to the fit, right? That theme of like finding a mutual fit. Of there's definitely the reason I've been at Yelp this long, and I think where Yelp really sort of works for people. It's like you can go to a bigger tech company or a bigger non-tech company, and you'll get a lot more structure. You might get a lot more like they've got highly developed processes that are fine-tuned, and that can be great if you're like, I don't want to do with any of this stuff. Like that can be really appealing. But it's sort of more structured. It's more like cookie cutter, and you've got to fit into the way that they define those roles. You can also go much smaller, which is like the Wild West, and it is whatever you make it, but you've got no structure, no support, and no like recruiting and design systems. And that's for the right person, that can be a really interesting problem to tackle. Yelp sort of fits still like in the middle, that we've like defined our processes enough that like we have a job ladder now, we have a career path, we have it defined, we have a really developed recruiting process. Like you don't have to deal with that really messy stuff, but there's still enough opportunity to define this and how Yelp fits into your career path for yourself. And for me, that's what I really like. Like I like that balance there. And I think if that's something you're looking for, is like a little bit of both of those worlds, that Yelp would be a really good fit for you.
Yeah. That's such a good point. Amazing, Josh. Thank you so much. This was incredible. I think I'm really happy that we got to host you for this session, because again, all the different facets you could pull from your own journey and speak to how those brought you till where you are today at Yelp, heading consumer design, and also giving us a lot of sneak peek behind some of the how the teams are structured, how they work together, how the career growth looks like. And Yelp's hiring across different roles. So from product designers to design ops, program managers, UX writers, researchers. So I've shared the link in the chat. If you are looking to learn more about those specific roles, do hit them, click on them, and do look out for the opportunities. We also have quite a few folks in our Slack community. Josh, after this AMA ends, I'll also invite Josh to our Slack community. So if you have more questions that he could not ask in the live stream today, I hope it's okay, Josh, that they can tag you and ask them there.
Ping away, ask me. I'd love to answer more questions.
Awesome.
And thank you, Preet, for hosting me, and everyone else for the questions. It was a great conversation. I enjoyed it.
Same here. Thank you so much. See you in Slack.
See ya. Bye, everyone.